All right. Hello, everyone, and welcome to PGF2. Let's see. I'm going to just go over a few things on how this class is laid out online. So this class, you will be working in Unreal. Who's excited to learn Unreal? Yeah, there we go. All right. So we have a few different things I want to just cover real quick in the intro. There's the course materials and policies, which whenever that opens, it basically has all the course materials related to this class. If you haven't already downloaded Unreal and aren't on at least version 4.16, please start doing so now. You're going to need to download this launcher and then download an engine once that installs. So, make sure that you have enough space on your computer. Unreal is fairly large, so you do need to make sure that your Windows partition does have a decent amount of space. Here are where all of the recorded lectures are going to be placed. Right now it's just a blank playlist because I'm recording the very first one right now. And also down here, there's the pre-recorded materials. They're using a different version than I will be using. They are from a couple months ago, so they are fairly up to date. But if you want to just start work a little bit ahead on some of these different lectures, by all means, you're welcome to look into those different lectures that will be upcoming. So here we have this course materials link. When you open that up, it should bring you to a Google Drive. These are all the materials for the class. You're going to want to make sure that you download this PGF2 assets. We'll be using this for our lectures. So I'm going to go ahead and download anyway. And I'm going to go ahead and open up Unreal and start opening a new project in that. Okay. Over in the library is where you're going to have your different engine versions. I have a few of them because I have several different projects that I need the different engines for. I'm going to make sure that I launch this newest version for this class. And then I can actually minimize the Epic launcher. And it'll take a little while for the engine to boot up, especially if it's the first time you're opening it. So, while that's going, I can go over a little bit more on the course materials or the class layout on here. Make sure you take care of the professionalism, discussion, academic honesty test, and our course policies test. All right, so Unreal finished opening. I'm going to go to New Project. I want a blueprint, blank, set for desktop console, maximum quality, and no starter content. I'm going to go ahead and name this Murphy Justin Lecture. And we can click Create. And that'll also take a little while for that to start up and open the editor. So looking over at the class layout again, we have that intro that has those 5 items. Then there's this attendance. These are going to be your ILAs. They have you doing different tasks for like taking a screenshot of one of the blueprints that we're going to be creating. If FSO wasn't slowing down as you guys are all downloading Unreal. Hand raised. What's up? You don't have attendance. Yes, I'm aware of that. You guys will have research listed for yours. I'm going over the lecture, the campus version, but The only difference is yours is just considered research instead of attendance. Okay, so inside here, there's the different learning activities, and they'll have you do different things like checking out some of the examples that Unreal has provided for you, and they're often directly linked to specific tasks that you would have to do for lab. So other than the attendance, we have this part called scripting. Scripting is where your main assignments will actually be done. All of these assignments will build off of the actual lectures we do. For this very first one, it's just literally following along today and submitting your actual project. So, goal for the lab, there's a rubric and a turn-in form. When you do this turn-in, you have to fill out a turn-in form so that I can see what to check off. Taking a look at the rubric, this first one's very straightforward because there's just the basic tasks for you to actually follow along and complete everything that we get done in lecture. So today we'll actually be doing the character movement and allowing the player to actually run around a map. So every assignment after that, I'll actually just go over assignment 2 next lecture so that you guys have a clear idea of how to fill that rubric out and how that works. Any questions about any of the course content? And another hand raised.
Yeah, so if I'm going to follow along with a lecture, what should I name my project?
Last name, first name, doesn't really matter what you name the specific project, but just making sure that your last name and first name's there. And then when you're submitting, you have to just actually submit a zipped folder, and that has a proper naming convention.
Okay, thank you very much.
And I do realize that Unreal may still be installing or take a little bit of time, but keep in mind that all of these are there is the pre-recorded reference if you need to catch up, and I will be submitting this lecture as soon as it's complete too. All right, so jumping into the actual content. If we take a look at Unreal, if you've never seen Unreal before, it's actually very similar to a Unity project. Most engines will have similar interfaces just to keep things kind of simple. There are a couple of differences. So if I created a new Unity project, let me just create one real quick and show you the different areas that are, well, different. So while Unity is opening up, we see that we have this world that it laid out for us with a very bland checkerboard textured floor. Take a look over here, we have this world outliner. That's pretty much the same thing as the hierarchy in Unity. So our Unity has a hierarchy with our level, with our scene name. It's got the camera and a directional light added for us. Unreal has a couple of different things like the atmospheric fog. It has light built into it, and it threw the floor there. They also have this thing called the player start. Any guesses as to what that does? Exactly, it's where our player will spawn when the game's actually playing. And we have a sky sphere. So there's not too much different from Unreal. As we can see, when we select an object in here, we see the transform, which has the location, rotation, and scale. A couple of different mobility things, setting it to static or stationary but enabled, and movable, things like that. If you ever have any questions about like what these things are, if you hover over them, it will actually pop up this tooltip and show you more information. Like the floor is a static mesh, parent class of actor. Actor is basically your game object. And there we go. Sorry, mouse cord was getting tangled up a little bit. And down here we see each of the different components. It's got that static mesh in there, has a material, just like Unity. So for our first thing we're going to want to do, we're going to want to create some different folders to help organize our project. We can do the hide or show sources so that we pop up and we can see our content folder. Content is basically the same thing as assets from Unity. We can right click and do a new folder. For this first folder, we're going to call it art. Let's go ahead and create another folder, and we'll call this blueprints. Blueprints are going to be what we use to script in Unity, and I want to make sure I click and drag this out of the art, but just inside the content folder. And I want to move here. So we have art, blueprints. I can click back on the content, add one more folder, and this will be maps. So instead of scenes, Unity or Unreal uses maps. All right. So we're going to want to save this map. Just like in Unity, we don't want it opening up a blank untitled map every single time. So I can go File and Save Current, and it'll save that level. And we can open up our map folder. We're going to call this level _0. And just tap enter to save, and boom, we have this map file. It's also got this map build data. You don't need to worry about that. That's just how it handles different lighting and things like that. So we now have a map, but it looks pretty much the same exact way that it did when we first opened it up. We're going to want to make sure that it's a little bit different so I don't just assume that this is a new level. What we can do is select that floor, and we can increase the scale. So one of the big differences in Unreal, yeah, just have a seat and then talk to me after. And we're going to want to make this a bit bigger. Now if you notice, the little gizmo over to this bottom left, X is forward, Y is right, and Z is up. So you always have to keep that in mind. So Z is up, no longer forward, as compared to Unity. So we just want to modify these X and Y values to increase that floor's width. And we'll do 10, just so that we have a big area that we can run around on. So I modified that. Go ahead and save current. And now we're going to also make sure that we want to put a texture on there. But what texture would I want to use? Well, that's where the PGF2 assets comes in. I'm going to go ahead and open up that zip folder. I see it's PGF2 assets. In Unreal, I'm going to want to import these assets into this content. So if I right click this content folder, I can go up to Show in Explorer, and right here is where all my content is. There's this Collections and Developers folder that gets added automatically. You don't need to worry about those assets. But we do want to drag and drop our actual folder in there. So we have this PGF2 assets. I'm going to go ahead and drag and drop, and it'll say copy. Okay. Sweet. So it copied those PGF2 assets in there. Fantastic. I'm going to just minimize those for now. And I see we have the art, blueprints, and maps. But I should probably just put all the content I'm creating in its own folder as well. So I'm going to go ahead and click on Content, New Folder, and this should just be your last name and first name. So I'm going to do Murphy Justin. And I want to move these folders inside there. I can select them one at a time, or I can hold Control and click and select multiples. Then I can move. I want to move, not copy. We see that we get an editor error saying that there's a missing file name. Well, I don't believe that, because all the files and folders are correct. So, taking a look at these PGF2 assets, we see we have animated stuff, some animations for those different meshes. Make sure that your animations are showing up. That's a good way of indicating that you are using the correct version of Unreal. Then there's some levels, which are just showing a basics of different animation stuff. We have a bunch of materials, and quite a few of them. And meshes, different textures, and visual effects for you guys to add in and do different features with. In this textures folder, I see that there's a T-textures texture. That's the material we're going to put on the floor. In order to create a material, we'll go into our art folder, right-click right here, and we see that there's a material option. So, naming this material, I'm going to start it with an M underscore and call this checkers. Okay. We can double click that and it'll bring us into the material editor. So you can right click and drag around to move around, and we see that this base material has nothing assigned to it yet. Well, we wanted to use that texture, so I'm going to right click and start typing texture, and we see that there's a texture sample. So clicking on this texture sample, we need to tell it what texture to actually use. Over here, this says none is currently applied. Well, if I do that drop down, I can quickly search for the T underscore checkers. And I see that's that texture that I want. So this still does not look like this, because we never actually told this texture sample which color to assign it to. I'm going to go ahead and say base color. So just dragging off these little pins and connecting them, you can get different types of textures for using the physical based rendering system. We're just going to use base color to start off with. So I can click save. I'm going to go ahead and close that. Now over here, with that floor selected, instead of saying use the default material, I can do that little drop down arrow and M underscore checkers. Oops, and I did two C's. And select that material. And give it a minute to compile the shaders, and boom, now our floor looks greatly different than when we first started. All right. I'm going to go ahead and close out of Unity, and we can start moving into making our actual player spawn. So in the blueprints, we're going to be creating a new blueprint. This will be a blueprint class. And here we see a description of many of these different things. There's also the help buttons right here, and remember, hovering over something will actually tell you exactly what it is. So if we want a character, so a character is a type of pawn that includes the ability to walk around. That sounds like exactly what I want. Let's go ahead and add that character. Now, what are we going to call this? Well, we're going to go ahead and call it character underscore face. Okay. And I'm going to just drag this into the level. And we see it's right there. But it's got that capsule and a bunch of different components and stuff, but I never told it which mesh or anything to use. I can do the drop down and select the mesh. So for this, there's this SK mannequin. And boom. Now that we have that in there, we see that's a little weird because our mesh is super tall compared, or like floating above the ground and everything. So I can actually double click this blueprint, open it up, and in our viewport, we should have the mesh showing up. This skeleton still says none. So I was editing it in the level, just that one instance of it. I needed to make sure that I'm modifying the character class itself, not just the one we placed in the level. So going over here, we can select our mannequin again. And we see that that's facing the wrong way because X is supposed to be forward, and it's facing down the Y-axis. So I'm going to go ahead and rotate it around the Z value. Let's do 90. Oh, I wanted negative 90. There we go. And I also want to drop it down a bit. So I'm going to say negative, and let's do 150, because the units is in centimeters, not like Unreal, or not like Unity, which uses feet or meters. And let's do negative 50 is pretty close. I want negative 75. There we go. So that placed it on the ground, and it's facing the correct direction. But I also need to make sure that that capsule fits around my player a little bit better. So I can select the capsule component over here, and I can change the scale on that. X and Y values look pretty good. I'm going to just increase the Z. So let's go ahead and say 1.25. Oh, and we see that that changed our mesh as well. So I'm going to Control Z, undo the scaling on that. And for this, I see down here there's also just this capsule half height and capsule radius. So instead of modifying the scale, let's set that back to 1. I can actually just adjust the height right here. Let's say 100. And need to move that mesh down a little bit more. So that's a little bit tighter on there. And make sure that the location is negative 75. Okay. I'm going to compile. I'm going to save that. Actually, I want the mesh down to 85 so that the feet are much closer to the floor. So compile and save. And we see our character in the world got updated as well. So that's all fine, but we need to actually tell it to move around and everything. So we're going to create a new blueprint. And for this one, we're going to have our player controller. So we just click on that player controller, and we'll call this player controller. We can open that up, and we see that it's got a camera. So we need to tell it, we need to give our player a player controller and which actual mesh to use. So we need to tell our character about the player controller. For that, right now we don't have any animations set up, and just scrolling down through here, double checking different things, we see pretty much nothing. But what's going to actually determine our player controller and which player controller to use? Well, we're going to want to create a new blueprint, and we need our game mode. Our game mode actually sets up which objects to spawn and a whole bunch of different things. I'm going to just call this my GM. We can open that up, and we see this one looks a little bit different than the other one. Because this one's just like a data blueprint, it doesn't need to have much in the actual blueprint itself. So we see right here we have a default pawn class. Well, we want to set our pawn class to that character base. And we have a player controller class. Well, if you notice, there's two player controllers because I didn't really rename this other than just saying player controller. So I'm going to actually go ahead and rename that player controller so it's not just player controller. To do that, I can right click and do rename. And we'll go ahead and just add my in front of this for my player controller. All right. So inside this player controller, we see it opened up. The second time I had opened it, it's telling me, no, we're only in a data blueprint. You can open the full blueprint editor right here. And here's where we can actually start interacting with different events. This is where you guys will be mostly doing all of your blueprint stuff inside this blueprint editor. So right now, if I take a look at the viewport, I see it's just got this camera thing attached to it. But I haven't really set up how I want that camera to actually affect stuff. So moving on, instead of just having the controller and the character, I want to add a new blueprint. And this will be another character, but I want it to be of this character base, so that anything, so that we have our character base, which could be used by AI, and then we have our player controller, which can control the character base and stuff like that. So from this, I'm going to create child blueprint class, And this will be our actual player character. We can open that up, and since this is our player, it's going to need to have a couple of additional components. We can add a component and say camera, so that we have a camera associated with that. I'm going to also add a component attached to the capsule called spring arm. And this will basically work like a camera boom. So I can drag that camera, attach it to the spring arm, and I see it's out the back side of it. I can adjust my spring arm target length, let's say 200, bring that a little bit closer, and I can just play around with these different values, giving it kind of like an over-the-shoulder type view. So I want it off to the right a little bit, moving that socket, and I can compile and save that. So, going back to the game mode, I never set my player controller. I want to make sure that it's using the one that we created, not just the default one. So our game mode now has player controller, the default pawn, which we now have our actual character. So we have player character instead of just that base. We compile, save, and over here I can press play, and I see that I have just this spectator thing kind of moving around. Player controller didn't actually get set. That's because we never told our level to use the actual our specific game mode. So for blueprints, we can open the level blueprint, and that's not actually what I wanted, sorry. Over here we have these world settings. Right now our game mode is set to none. We can set it to our specific game mode, the MyGM. Go ahead, save, and we can give that a play. Now I see that it's got that player controller and spawned it right at that player start, and our camera's offset kind of over the shoulder. I can press escape to stop playing, or while I'm playing, you can do function shift F1 and you get your mouse cursor back so that you can check out things while you're actually playing. So I see over here in the hierarchy, now that I'm starting to play, I have the player controller, the game mode, a HUD, which is currently just blank, and our character base, along with an AI controller created for that one enemy that we have just placed in the level. But we need to make sure that our player controller can move around using WASDA. So I can go ahead and go to the settings, and I can select the project settings. By default, Unity had a bunch of default inputs for like moving forward, things like that. In Unreal, it starts you with no inputs whatsoever. You have to go down, scroll down over to the engine, and there's this input tab. Here we have action mappings and axis mappings. So I'm going to go ahead and add two axis mappings. First one will be move forward. And the second one will be look up. And, oops, didn't mean to add that. And we'll do one more for being able to look right. So we haven't actually assigned what keys we want on this. For move forward, well, under keyboard, that's going to be the W press. Now our move forward can actually function a couple different ways. If I wanted to say maybe move back on the S, so keyboard and select the S, I can change the scale value. Instead of 1, just put that as a -1. So let's go ahead and see how that looks when we're hooking it up to our player controller. So we need to open up our player controller. Inside the event graph, we're going to want to right-click in this areas, and we just created one called Move Forward. So I see there's two different things that come up. One is an axis event, and one is an axis value. We want the actual event. So anytime that button is, or the axis value changes, we get notified with that value associated with it. So what we can do is actually move our character forward by calling, my mouse is moving. Let's see, add actor, what is it called? My mind's totally blanking. Add movement, there's something like that. You should just be able to add it like straight off, but because your player controller should have an associated actor. So what I can do is get controlled actor. Get controlled pawn. That's the one I was looking for. And then from this value, we can do add movement input. All right. So connect the exec pin up, because this is how you control the actual flow of what function will be called. So every time the input axis moves forward, if that value changes, and we can pass this value directly over to that scale value, and we need to specify a specific direction. Now this is world direction. I want to actually make sure for Windows. Yes. I want to make sure that I'm using the characters forward. So from that controlled pawn, I can do get actor forward. And pass that as the direction we want to move. So let's compile that. Let's save this. And go ahead and check out our play. So I press W and it starts moving forward. I press S and it starts moving backward. So let's get the other inputs all set up. Go back to the project settings. So I have a couple of mouse different interactions. There's X, Y, which is moving the mouse up or to the right. Unreal should be done in Windows, yes. So if this is on, let's see, look up, I would basically want that to be on when I'm moving the mouse up. That'll be the mouse Y. And looking right, I can go ahead and select that mouse X. Now here's where the scale comes in again. If I wanted to invert my look settings, I could just change this value to negative. Real easy and quick to do. We need to actually set our player controller, and similar to how we were doing the move forward, there'll be another event for look right. And we want that actual event from that. So, since I'm already getting the controlled pawn up here, I can drag off that and set, or there should be a rotate. There's a get control rotation, use controller rotation pitch, a whole bunch of different things. I don't want to do any of that. I can do, let's see. If I want this to actually just control the camera offset, I need to make sure that our camera is set up to use the control rotation. So with the spring arm attached, I can scroll down here. I see in camera settings, use pawn control. And I see that there's inherit pitch, yaw, and roll. If you guys don't know what that is, that's just the rotations around these different axes. Pitch is the rotation around the right vector. Yaw is the rotation around the up vector. And roll is the rotation around the forward axis. So I can off the controlled pawn, add control, and I see that there's add controller input, add controller pitch, roll, and yaw. So if we're doing the look right, I would want to do the yaw. So what we can do is just bring that over there, connect that value up, save that, compile, and we'll give that a quick play. We play, I move the mouse left and it rotates left, move the mouse right and it rotates right. So all that is working perfectly. Still need to do the up and down. Just like we were doing up here, add controller pitch input. And we're going to use the input axis of look up. Oh, and I just hit enter on the axis value instead of the actual event. Look up. I want the axis event. And we'll just connect those pins. We compile, save it, and give it a quick play. So because I was in the blueprint when I did the play, it's now playing straight from that blueprint. I want to make sure I'm always at the level scene so I can see everything. So I can look up, look down, turn right, turn left. Everything's dandy. Let's go ahead and add a couple more inputs. I want to be able to look right and left using the A and D key. So what I can do is add two new keys, select the values, keyboard, let's do D, and then A. I want A to look left, so I can negate one of those values. I press save, and I go to play it. Now pressing D rotates right, A rotates left, but that's pretty fast of a speed. Maybe I want it to go a bit slower. So in order to do that, what I can do, there we go, is down here, instead of directly using that axis value, I can actually add a float. Over here, in the variables, I can add a variable. So let's go ahead and say this will be turn speed. And instead of a Boolean type, I want to make sure that it's a float type. And I can compile, and I see that I can now fill out a default value. Let's go ahead and set it to 10. What I want to do is multiply the axis value by that turn speed. So turn speed, whoops. If I just do the multiply, which is asterisk, I can see I have a bunch of different options. Well, these are just two floats, so I want the float by a float. And then I want this to be that actual value that we're outputting. I can drag this float in and let go, and it asks, do I want to get or do I want to set? Well, I just want to get this value, because I already set it with a default value of 10. I can connect that up, compile, save, and now it's being multiplied by 10. So, it's going much faster. And I think I only did that on the yaw input, or the pitch. Ah, yes. That's my bad. I meant to just modify. I can break the links, move them up, so that they're modifying the rotation of turning left and right. That would be the yaw. Pass these over. So it's axis value times turn speed, and we're sending that over to the controller yaw input. Compile, save, and give that a test now. I'm moving crazy fast. What I can do is, oh, don't want that, I want this. Select that turn speed. Instead of 10, maybe I wanted 0.5. So it just moves half as fast. Compile, save, minimize those, and play, and boom. Much more slow, and we can move around our map and everything. But our player doesn't look that good just kind of going around in T-pose floating everywhere. So what we want to do now is actually tie in some animations with it. I'm going to just save all before I leave off. And did you guys want to take like a 10-minute break or so? Yep. All right. Then you guys are free to go use the restroom, get a drink of water, and just we'll meet back in about 10 minutes. So we ended up leaving off with our character being able to move around and turn. Let's go ahead and make that look a little nicer and add some of the animations synced up into it. So I have the characters stuff. I'm going to go ahead and add another blueprint. We'll right click and we'll create an advanced asset. This will be our animation. I see a bunch of different stuff for animation. I'm going to want an animation blueprint. So I click on that and boom, this new animation blueprint thing pops up. So I have to select, I'm going to want an animation instance, and I'm going to want to select a skeleton. So I can search the assets for a specific skeleton or select one from down here. UE4 skeleton is the one that we have provided in the PGF2 assets. We just click on that, and now it's got an associated skeleton. Click OK, and we'll say, we'll name this My Animation. We can go ahead and open that up, and we see a new window. This is called Persona. This is their animation editor. We see it's got this final animation pose, and you can pass in a result. What we're going to want to do is actually create a state machine for our animations. If I right-click and just type state machine, we see under state machines, there's a new state machine. We're going to want to drag over that pose as our result. The state machine will be our locomotion. It's got a warning because we haven't actually set anything up inside of the state machine. You can double click it and boom, you're now in a state machine. So move that out of the way. We see that this is the entry point for our animation. We see we're in My Animation, Animation Graph, Locomotion, and this is the entry point for this animation graph. To go back, you can just use these quick top parts to actually link back to the graph and re-enter the state machine. Right now it says preview is out of date. Please compile. And down here in the compiler results, it's not connected to state. So what I need to do is over here in our asset browser, I have all these different animations. I'm going to go ahead and grab an idle, and as you can see, I can just drag and drop that in here, and our entry can go straight to idle. Keep in mind that you can only do it to this wide gray bar, not directly on the node itself. So I click that, I press compile, and our character is now doing a little idle animation. Well, let's go ahead and save that and make sure that our animation is working inside the world. I press play, and lo and behold, they're not animating at all. That's because on our characters, we never told it a specific animation to use. So with the character selected, I can go to the details panel, and in here I see use animation blueprint is set as the animation mode, but I don't have an animation class associated with it. Well, I created that My Animation, and that's the state machine we're going to be using. So I can compile, save, minimize that, and give it a quick play. And I see our character is actually animating. However, he's still just kind of sliding around. I need to actually get a walk animation and stuff in there. So our animation is going to idle. That's perfectly great. Let's go ahead and add a run animation. Now I want to say I want to go from idle to run. So we'll drag off here to run. And you see this new type of connection popped out. So this is an actual transition rule. We need to let it know when it can transition from idle to run. Should be very similar to how you guys set up the windmill experiment or the door experiment. So you guys should be kind of used to how the animation state machine's working. As we can see, if we open up this rule, it's just got a simple can enter transition. Well, right now, we need to actually get some stuff so that we can check a specific value. Well, what value we're going to need? We're going to need to add a variable. We're going to need some sort of speed to know if it needs to go from idle to run. So let's go ahead and add speed. And don't forget to change the variable type. That'll just be a simple float. So we can drag this float in here, do a get on it, and from here we can say if, oops, I just want to create a new one, if, as soon as I type if, it brings us to this branch. That's what if conditions are for. So if our speed is greater than, and I can just do a float to float. And I notice that I don't really have any exec nodes to connect that branch. I just have those other round nodes for the data being passed in. So I don't even need to have this branch. I can send that bool directly to the can enter transition. So if speed is greater than 0, let's make it a little bigger. Let's say, well, greater than 0 is fine. We'll just use that for right now. I compile, I save, and in the anim preview editor, I see I have this default variable right there. If I say 10, boom, it's now running. If I set it back to 0, it didn't go back. If we take a look at our actual state machine, we can see it went from idle to run, but there's no way of going back. So I need to actually add another transition back to idle. In this transition, we're going to be checking that speed. So we'll say speed is less than or equal to and we'll just say 0 for right now. Now, if I were to actually change it so that it starts running and put that back to 0, it runs and stops. That's all great, but right now we're just using hard-coded values for this speed. We need to actually get them from the actual player. So, down here, we have this event graph, and we see event update animation. So what I can do is drag off there, get actor, and I don't have direct access to my actor in this. But what I can do is make this float visible by clicking this little eye, and inside our actual player, inside our character, I want the full blueprint editor. Every frame, so event tick, this is like your update call for Unity. We can go ahead and say get actor, do I want get actor or get movement? Nope. Sorry, I'm having a little blank on what node that I would want.
remember which mode.
Getting the freaking speed of the character. Get movement direction. Get velocity. Duh. Get linear velocity. And we'll say from the capsule component, that's going to be easiest. And that return value is returning a vector. So converting a vector to an actual speed is just simply as doing magnitude, which as I type magnitude, it comes up with vector length or vector length squared. We just want the vector length. Okay. And we're also going to need to drag in our mesh. We'll be using that. And we'll be saying set animation, not set animation, set float, no. Oh, I need to get the animation directly. Clicked on the wrong one. Just select it and delete it. I believe on Mac you have to do Shift Delete. Okay, get animation, and we want the animation instance. And from that, I want to cast to my animation so that we know about the actual variable we want. I'm going to connect that exec pin up so that this, as my animation, we can set speed. And hovering over this, we see that it's just setting the value of speed. We want to do that only when the cast is appropriate. If the cast fails, that means that the animation's not hooked up to this. And we want to set the speed equal to that vector length of this linear velocity. I can go ahead and compile that, save it, and we can test that out. So I press play, it's not moving, I start moving, and the animation runs. All right, any questions about getting the animations hooked up? No? All right, well that is pretty much it. I'm going to just go over how to turn in. So first thing I want to do is make sure to save all. So save everything. And second thing I'm going to want to do is actually export this stuff. So just like before, we can right click on the folder we want, show it in Explorer, and our maps, blueprints, and art contain all the content we just created. I'm going to go back up to the content level, and I just want to take this folder, my named folder, send to compressed zip folder, and go ahead and add what lab it's currently on. So I'll say this is for like assignment 1. What I also want to do is make sure that my input settings get exported. In order for that to work, I need to go to the project settings and check out that input tab. Scroll up a little bit, I see an export and import. I'm going to want to export these settings. Now by default, it goes into the saved config folder. I'm going to just bring it out and put it right in my contents folder so that I know to associate it in the right spot. We'll save that. Then taking a look at the content folder, I want to make sure that that input backup is also in that zip. So it's got my named folder and the input backup. That's what you would turn in on FSO. But before you turn in, you definitely want to check it on your local computer. So go ahead and close out of your Unreal project, launch a new one, twiddle your thumbs while you're waiting. And we're just going to test in a brand new empty project. I don't really care about the name because this is just going to be a test project. So we close out. Well, it's loading in the background, but I'm going to close some of this stuff up. Don't need the assets open. Don't need two folders on the content. Just need that one content folder. So I see it opened up project settings and everything. What I want to do is actually import all of my stuff into this new content. Easiest way to do that is do the show in Explorer. And now we're in a content folder. Checking out our other folders stuff, we have this zip file, which has that input.ini and the Murphy Justin stuff. I don't want to just import that. I need to make sure I'm importing the PGF2 assets before I try and do my stuff. Otherwise, my stuff, which is using the PGF2 assets, won't work. So in here, we have the PGF2 assets. On this side, we have that new project. Just drag and drop so it says copy. Let that copy over. Close out of that PGF2 assets. And here we have the zip file that we would submit on FSO. Want to bring that over as well. We can close out of this old project. And down here, we now see that this newer project that we're testing has the art, the blueprints, the map, all that stuff in there. Need to make sure to go to project settings and make sure to import the input, because right now it doesn't have any input settings. We can do an import, pop open to that content folder, and we want to import that input backup. I press OK. I can see if I expand this, I have those different axes that I created. Okay, so that looks good. If I go and just try and play it, whoop, that doesn't look right. Exactly, you have to make sure to open up your level, because right now it just by default opens up that blank level. You need to make sure to open your level and give that a quick play. All right. So any questions about how to test your import or test your export or anything like that? Nope. You guys all clear on everything then? All right. So that first assignment is literally just following along what we just did and turning that in just to test and make sure that you can turn in correctly. One thing I will say, make sure you do the turn-in form. If you've taken this class before and already have one submitted, just edit it and it will update. All right. Sounds good. And I'm going to go ahead and close out of this.